Gentlemen, it's my job to try and persuade you, together with my colleague, Dr. Harjun Chang, of the truth of this proposition that there is too much maths and too little history in economics as it's currently taught and conceived. Well, let's start off with an obvious question. Why do people study economics? Basically to understand how economies work. There are two different ways of understanding that. I mean, there's maths and there's history, and they stand at opposite poles in terms of epistemology. Let's take maths first. First, two things that maths tries to do, claims to do. First of all, it's concerned with propositions that are necessarily true. That is, it's a branch of logic. But secondly, maths is concerned with propositions that can be proved. And economists really endorse maths in the second sense, that is, for generating provable propositions. But because the social system to which they apply maths is so complex, too complex to obtain reliable proofs, they're tempted by the first, or what I would call the Platonic view of the subject. And throughout the history of economics, one can find economists praising maths as the pathway to rigorous and elegant laws, akin, as one famous economist said, akin to the laws of celestial mechanics. And this powerful temptation, Platonic temptation, was very well summarized by Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman when he wrote this after the crash of 2008-2009. The economics profession went astray because economists, as a group, mistook beauty clad in impressive-sounding mathematics for truth. Economists fell in love with the old idealized vision of an economy in which rational individuals interact in perfect markets, this time gussied up with fancy mathematics. It's an old vision, gussied up with fancy maths. And this insidious drift towards Platonism explains something it's particularly, you can find it in the work of Bob Lucas, explains something which a number of people have noticed, and that is the strong normative thrust of mathematical economics. Now, an economic model is not like that like a model of an aeroplane, that is reality in a miniaturized form. It approaches reality by way of assumptions. An assumption is said to be chosen for its purchase on reality, but in fact, more usually, assumptions are selected because of their convenience, typically to make possible the solution of an equation by excluding extraneous elements. But these acts of exclusion are choices, one's always got to remember that, which define the problem of interest or direct the inquiry along certain paths. That is, they reflect the values of the economist. As soon as you get into an assumption-based mathematical modeling, you are actually inserting the problems you think are important and also inserting your view on how they ought to be discussed and excluding other views on how they ought to be discussed. And this exclusionism, together with the virtual impossibility of proving anything, gives mathematical economics a powerful incentive to make the real world more like their models than to make the models more like the real world. So there's one very, very important bias in mathematical economics. What then is the role of history in economics? I would argue that the role of history is that of a reality check. Propositions from financial theory, such as risks are correctly priced on average, could not survive any actual knowledge of financial market, the way financial markets work, or of economic history. The branches of history especially suited for reality checks are economic history, the history of economic thought, and political and social history. All are excluded or minimized in the standard economics curriculum. They have been largely pushed out by mathematical economics. The general reason for the exclusion of history is quite insidious. It arises from the belief that everything to be learnt from history has already been incorporated into the latest textbooks, and this ludicrous belief has taken a heavy toll on the study of economics thought. It arises, I think, from what I call physics envy, an affliction to which many economists are prone. Economics wants to be a hard science. If economics is like a natural science, the lessons of history have already been incorporated in the latest models, and no useful purpose is thereby served by recalling the history of mistakes. To quote J.B. Say, famous for something known as Say's law, and this was already true in the early 19th century, he wrote, "What useful purpose can be served by the study of absurd opinions and doctrines that have long since been exploded and deserve to be? It is mere useless pedantry to attempt to revive them. The more perfect a science becomes, the shorter becomes its history. Our duty with regard to errors is not to revive them, but simply to forget them." So much for the history of economic thought. And contemporary courses in economics have taken Say's dictum to heart and made it their business to exclude past errors. And that's why you don't actually have any study, really, of economic thought in most economic curriculum today, because they would be the study of mistakes. And we've transcended those mistakes, haven't we? That's why we never have any crashes.